All right, everybody, welcome back. It's episode 4 of volume 2 of the Sandcrawler. Daniel and Jeff here. Excited to talk about a couple different topics today. We're going to talk about Mando, chapter 21, the most recent episode. We're going to do a quick recap on that, give our thoughts and our perspectives. Been a divisive year for Mando. If you listened to the last episode, Daniel and I went back and forth. I won the argument, which was interesting. He conceded that I was actually correct. I don't know. But we will go into this episode, talk about it, give our perspective and thoughts. Yeah, overall, Daniel, I'd just give the viewers a tease and our listeners a tease. I thought it was good. And then, as per usual, we're going to jump into some expanded universe lore, legends, essential guide. Daniel's much more creative than I am as far as concocting a funny name. But we're going to talk about an individual. Daniel, I'm going to try to say it. I should know this. I know the name by reading it so much, but an individual by the name of Ulic Qel-Droma, kind of a huge deal in the expanded universe. And if you were a kid in the 80s or 90s, you knew this character. And it actually ties historically pretty well to the context of what's going on in The Mandalorian this season. So we'll jump into that. And then Daniel will talk about the giveaway still rolling. But anything else, Daniel? I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of kick us off on Mando chapter 21, because I'm curious, just generally speaking, after the last episode, what did you think of this one? What was your general takeaway?
Before we jump into Mando, I do, from my understanding, you pronounced Ulic Qel-Droma correctly. I've seen it mainly hyphenated, although it does exist as non-hyphenated. But the thing with that is real quickly, is that there are different readers for audiobooks, whatever, that might pronounce it differently than you might see the phonetic spellings in the essential guides. The new essential guide to characters does have phonetic spellings, which absolutely differ from what certain audio readers do. So it's not uncommon to maybe get a name wrong or mispronounce. But from everything that I understand, Ulic Qel-Droma. Yep. So back onto Mando. So okay.
I like this picture. I like this picture. I should.
Yeah. It's a little bit blurry. I apologize. I didn't realize that blowing it up for our YouTube viewers, which I'm going to try to get the YouTube up pretty quickly. For our podcast listeners, you're not going to miss a whole lot in this particular episode without the ability to see pictures. I'm going to show, a couple stills from the show, and there's going to be a couple of cool shots of our subject for the what I'll call the Essential Flight series, because it combines items that you might see from the Essential Guide series and also things that you might see from the Fantasy Flight series and RPG game specifically. And so Essential Flight, until someone tells me that's stupid, and we'll definitely change the name, but we'll go with that for now. So Mando episode, I felt like this was one of those episodes that it's a bridge episode that you can handle. It was decent. It was on paper a pretty well done episode, but something in the execution to me felt just a little bit hollow.
Agreed.
I think that there was a lot of cool moments here, and we're going to get to a lot of cool things that happened, et cetera, et cetera. But as an episode on the whole, I'd probably say it was like, and again, I don't want to, this is not going to become a review show. There's only a couple episodes of Mando left. Bad Batch, which we're not even going to discuss in this episode, just wrapped. So not every week is going to be review. So just to get that out of the way. But for this episode, I don't know, 7, 8, somewhere around there. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, it says right. I would give it a 7 or 8. That's fair. There were a lot of good highs. I thought, we talked about it last episode. The types of Easter eggs thrown in on this one were the ones that I particularly liked. Like I thought they were good. They were payoffs. And so that I always, when I see something like that I think is like a very good Easter egg, and you know which one I'm talking about, maybe I'll just come out and say it. Like, I feel like I will maximize and stretch that because I was so excited. And the main one for me personally was the appearance of the hero from the show, Star Wars Rebels, Zeb Orrelios. So we got to see him in live action. That was really cool. It was fun. to see that species for their first time, like
Yep.
manifest from everything from concept art in the McQuarrie days now into Rebels, and then we get to see him. He looked really cool. And so again, like
Agreed.
it's those types of things that I get a kick out of for sure. Yeah. Oh, nice. You have it right there.
Of course, man. I got for our YouTubers, I put up a shot of our good guy Zeb
And you know,
next to awesome IG and collector. His handle is Angry Appa because he loves Appa from Avatar: The Last Airbender. So cool shot of Zeb. But back to you.
two things about Zeb. One, he's obviously too cool to wear like the normal orange flight suit. So I love that they gave him like the awesome blue Rebel flight suit. The other thing, I just noticed this, and I'm not making a stretch. I have to imagine though, Filoni is a fan of this series, but does Zeb just generally in character design not kind of remind you of Jet from Cowboy Bebop? Like, doesn't he?
Yeah,
Was that
absolutely.
intentional? Okay.
No, that's a real good pull. That's a real good pull. From just kind of like his stature, his nature, the beard doesn't hurt. The fact
Yeah.
that he's bald on top. This is definitely resonating with some Cowboy Bebop for me.
Dig it. Well, yeah,
Definitely.
I'll kick it back to you. I mean, all I would say is, yeah, I think your assessment's right. I'd give it the same review. My parting, and it's not meant to be a shot, is just generally, we talk, I think, at pretty good length about whether we're talking about the volume or we're talking about what we're observing sort of in the background happening. I continue to be amazed by, especially in this episode, what appears to be a total lack of extras. There were like 12 people in this town, and like I don't know, it just seems really odd. There should be no shortage of extras. I mean, gosh, you could call the 501st and just be like, can I borrow seriously like 1,000 of you just to play citizens? But I think
I would pay money to do that. I know that some people would get paid or whatever, and there's definitely laws against people paying whatever. I would pay money to be in there.
Oh, definitely. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that, like, not to like deviate it into that territory, but I will say that was to me the most shocking thing. Like, so Grief Karga evacuates all of like 19 people from the town, and then like they're greeted, like they're like, you are part of Navarro, and like we're ceding all this land to you. I'm like, hold on, there's like 9 Mandalorians, and then like they are outnumbering
Yeah.
the rest of the people. I don't know, but maybe I'm overthinking it. It seemed very like striking to me.
What was odd to me is that they have used the volume in situations that I did not think called for it. Maybe to save a few dollars. So again, I don't know the behind the scenes stuff, whatever. But to me, this was a good opportunity for them to use the volume to add more people in the background. I actually have in my notes. I wrote several pages of notes for Ulic Qel-Droma for our Essential Flight section. For this on Mando, I just wrote a couple of quick notes, and one of them was Navarro, apparent population 15. There have to be, I get it. The pirate king laid waste to the city. There's probably a number of people that died. There's probably people that are trapped that didn't get out. So not everyone that he took out with him, or not that everyone that he led away, it doesn't represent the full population of the city or that area. At the same time, if that's the case, it kind of undermines the fact that he led his people away. No, he got away with his small crew. Like, that's it.
Right.
So I definitely had that written down. So that was kind of odd. I felt like, to start it all off, I love the idea. First of all, it's Gorian Shard or Gorian Shand. It's Shard. When he showed up on the hologram, it obviously was evocative of the Emperor showing up before Vader. That was kind of cool. It was a nice little nod. But generally speaking, I still kind of thought that the pirates were kind of corny, cheesy, not intimidating, which doesn't set the right tone for other parts of this show and other parts of Star Wars generally that we've seen including even parts of Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and certainly Andor tonally, when it comes to like violence and what it means to be a true villain that's actually laying waste to a city. I kind of felt like these were like the people at Disney World showed up that were in their costumes that were kind of like, hey, I'm a big jerk and I'm causing problems, and oh, by the way, I'll take a picture with your kids.
Yeah.
And
like, they like lean over your kid's dinner table while he's like eating a grilled cheese, and they're like, "That's my grilled cheese." You're like, "Come on, man!" Like, no, because to your point, like, and I don't mean to like cut you off, but like when you're just describing that, like all I thought of were like the Denzians in Jabba's palace, and how every one of those guys, even if they were background characters, even if their lore dictated just how like gruesome and like devious they were, everybody like made me uncomfortable on screen in Return of the Jedi, where you kind of look around and you're like, oh man, like this looks like a nasty crew, and like there's palpable danger, right? Like for Luke and Leia and them, and you're like, okay. And yeah, I can't remember the name of that Nikto, if they even identified him. He's like sort of the peach colored Nikto. He's the survivor that flies off. I felt like that was so I don't know. Your description is very apt. Like I felt like they were a bit cheesy, down to the, as much as I loved him, the little Ugnaught that looked like Shmi for whatever from Peter Pan.
Mr. Smee.
Mr. Smee, yeah. But I agree, like when you lean too heavily into the sort of like funny, goofy, overly comical angle, then what it tells me subconsciously as a viewer is like that no one's really in danger, right? Like no, they're not gonna like, no one's gonna really get hurt, and that it just is what it is. But like, that's kind of the vibe I got. Right? We knew that Bo and Din were gonna like take care of these guys in a matter of like 5 business minutes. So yeah, I don't know. I'm with you.
Right, and that brings up the only other thing I want. Well, there's a couple more, so I'll take that back. But that brings up the only other part of the Navarro plot, I guess. It seemed weird to me, and this is a case of, I can't call it anything other than somewhat sloppy writing, is that both in air combat or ship-to-ship combat, and also in the street combat where the Mandalorians are taking back the city, everybody, ships included, are exactly as powerful as the story requires it to be. And that's just a shame, because the Mandalorians are running through the streets as if they don't have jetpacks. From the previous episode, one of the worst things that can happen to a Mandalorian is becoming stranded because your jetpack runs out of fuel. And here they've dropped in with their jetpacks. They have not run out of fuel. And yet when the high ground would be incredibly advantageous because someone's taking pot shots with them from a stationary cannon, like, guys, jetpacks, fly, get above. Not only are you going to be out of like the literal range of that cannon because it can't angle upward enough, but also you have a so much better view of the city and the streets and everything from the air. We saw when in the first season of Mando, we saw how Death Watch flew in from above, blew things up, flew back out, came in, picked things up, was aerial assault from above. We saw it in episode 3 with these very Mandalorians. So it seemed again, the reason that they did that is because the writing required them to be pinned down for a time. It required that admittedly cool scene from Emily Swallow, the armorer Mandalorian. I get that it dictated all that. That's how it came about. But it just, you have to earn that stuff. Like, you can't write it in just for the sake of writing it in and depower or nerf or conversely overpower an OP a la the N1 fighter and Bo-Katan's ship. Like, they have no business taking out a complete Corsair ship that has a complement of snub fighters. There's no way. Like, I get that they're very good, but
not to mention, like, it to your point, it vacillates for me. And this isn't a critique. Well, it is a critique, but it's not necessarily a negative. Like, I'm willing to go along with it. I think the part that confuses me is that the prior episode, or maybe, I'm sorry, it was this episode. We spend this episode having this like heavy deliberation about like whether or not they're gonna go put it all on the line to like liberate Navarro, right? And then, Pre Vizsla or Heavy Mando, I forgot his name. Like the fact that like they kind of come around on it, to me intimates that like, okay, so there's going to be like a big battle that ensues. Like, and it really, to your point, like the strategy here was, well, we're just gonna like fly in and like drop everybody off and it'll be fine. Then we'll just like distract the aerial fighters. And so to me, it's exactly what you described, but it's very confusing because I'm expecting a challenge, but then I see a bunch of these like goofy sort of like showbiz pizza pirates, and then I'm like, well, okay, so are they really gonna go? And then they're picking off Mandalorians here or there, and I think again, it's not necessarily like that it's a bad thing because overall, I did enjoy the execution of some of the action sequences. Um, but it goes back to maybe what I was critiquing last episode is that when we looked at Death Watch in the flashback sequences of the Mandalorian, or even in Clone Wars, you have like a very Spartan, militarized, disciplined unit that's acting as like this very like scalpel surgical strike force, and you got a little bit of that here. But then, to your point, they're getting like blown off of like scaffolding from like and like being wide in the open. And again, I'm not trying to like overdo it, but I think you're right. Like I think there's something there as far as there has to be discipline in the writing, that when you build to these sequences that you're not just like shifting the tenor of, I don't want to say power levels, but you know what I mean, like capabilities. You're right, like vacillating between like nerfing and overpowering somebody, to me just gets, it's not that it's like a critique, it's that it just confuses me as a viewer because I really don't have a strong sense of like, well, how capable is like Din Djarin and his crew really? I mean, if I see them struggle to put up a fight against 19 pirates that are kind of goofy, then I have to presume no like Imperial remnant force or like, I don't know, faction that they may encounter, criminal organization, Black Sun type group, would ever like lose any ground to these guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or ever need to conscript their services. Conversely, like isn't the alternative to being in this one of the major alternatives to being in the convent is being like a bounty hunter, essentially, more or less, maybe assassins, but mostly
Basically.
bounty hunters.
Yeah.
So I mean, it didn't fit, and they could have done it differently, where you still have them become amazing and awesome, and maintain that mystique, because these were not Mandalorians that weapons are their religion, and these were not the Mandalorians where they had been training since birth, literally, to fight and do exactly what they were supposed to do. It should have been elite. It should have been so one-sided that the amazing sights shouldn't have been Emily Swallow doing her scene. Although she could have kept it. They could have made it differently. They could have set up a different scenario where she does, for whatever reason. Maybe she has to take down her shield, so she goes into the control room with a shield, where and takes people out that way, and then lowers a shield for all the Mandos to get into something. Whatever. Still give her the moment. Still give my man Tate Fletcher, who wears the suit for Pre Vizsla, the heavy Mando. Still, you can give him his moment where he brings out the Gatling gun. I get all that. You can do all that without having to nerf them and make them look bad. So it was what it was.
Can I ask your? I'm asking this objectively, like I'm not presupposing any kind of like argument or position here. I'm really confused about something, and I tried to find the answer, but then I stopped. Is Navarro a reference to like a city state on the planet? Is it the only city state on the planet, or is Navarro the entirety of the planet, and we're having Grief Karga like oversees it? Because I'm very confused when they talk about like taking over the entirety of the planet. Like, well, why would you start there? Like, to your point, it's like it's a plot device. I know why they're doing it. I know that's how you get Flash, but like, did that confuse you at all, or am I just an idiot? Because like,
my understanding when it comes to Star Wars planets, you have any number of range of populous and habitable spots. So somewhere like Coruscant is literally completely covered with cityscape. It's from head to toe, every inch of it except for the tip of Mount Umade. Then you have these outer rim backwater planets. They're smaller in literal size as a celestial body, and they might only have, because there's like lava pits on this planet if you remember in the earlier episodes and stuff. And the Mandos also at the same time, they did use the sewers of this city as their hideout, and so it couldn't be heavily populated. So I actually imagine, and I think that how it works is, this is basically, when you go to the planet, you're basically going to this city, and that's it. Like there might
Yeah,
be small outposts or whatever, but this is the center hub, and there's nothing else out there. Lava pits, uninhabitable space, etc.
I assume that was like a satellite, or like, the forest moon of Endor, like to your point, it's a
Yeah.
smaller whatever. Yeah, no, I get that. I guess the part I was confused by was then the reference to taking over the planet versus just occupying the city, because to your point, like, well, either there is uninhabitable land per the lava pits, per all of like the dangerous environment,
Yeah.
or there isn't, because they ceded all this land on the outskirts or to these other places to the Mandalorians. And so all I was trying to reconcile in my mind is, what is the risk of like losing this planet versus the city? Because I'm trying to understand, if I'm really trying to understand if I'm missing something here. Like,
I feel like it's just one and the same. I feel like it's
okay,
one and the same.
okay,
There's no reason to have the planet if you don't have the city, because you're not, all the resources are in the city, the population's in the city, the trade goes through the city. I have to
I got it.
imagine
That
that
makes sense.
that's it. Like, to control the planet, you must have the city. And for a pirate, the very nature of pirates, they're not looking to like set up an outpost. They're not like hardened militaries. They want to
Yeah,
come and plunder and loot. So instead of setting up a base and setting up their military and stuff, and like actually doing a full scale invasion to take over, they're just kind of like, we're pirates. We'll blow it up.
I guess I buy it. I felt like that was still just, it was confusing to me.
Yeah, and then we got one more. We got one more on this that is kind of like, what the heck? Huh?
Yeah.
Tomatoes? How I'm gonna have to be an alien creature with multiple appendages to start counting on my fingers how many comedians we're getting in Disney Star Wars. And I don't even know why.
So there's a very funny, like one of the funniest scenes to me from Wayne's World 2 is, there's a sequence where Wayne is like trying to get to the wedding, and he stops at a gas station and he asks where Gordon Street is. If you haven't seen it, it's like so funny. And this old guy comes in, like, can we just stop for a minute? Like, guys, I know this has like a small part with only a few lines, but can we get a better actor? And so like the set people break the fourth wall, they take him out and they put in Charlton Heston.
Yeah.
And like the funny thing about that is, like, to me, it's like the inverse of this. Like, every time I see a comedian, I do this, like, because I know it's going to be lighthearted. I know there's like some like funny, abbreviated, lighthearted tone to it. You don't like, even when Bill Burr appeared, Bill Burr's lines were comedic in nature, even if he was like a former Imperial like sharpshooter. And we've said this on so many episodes, but I agree. Like, this is very distracting, and like the joke is fine the first couple of times, right? Like, it's fine. I'll whatever. But now I just find it annoying. I'm not gonna like mince words here. And like, honestly, it's something that's like a pet peeve of mine in this show. I find it so tonally distracting that, for that entire sequence, I'm completely, as a viewer, confused as to whether I take what he's saying seriously or not
Yeah.
seriously. Am I watching Tim Meadows do a bit as a rebel
Right.
officer, or am I watching him play a role that's serious? And I will absolutely argue until I'm blue in the face with somebody. Like, I don't care how good of a quote unquote actor you are or how well you deliver the lines. Like, the minute that you put somebody like Dane Cook in a Saving Private Ryan, I don't care. Like, I, as the viewer, I cannot separate that. And it's a little bit of that here. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too hard, but I
No, I
think
mean,
you agree.
look,
Like,
Adam Sandler has had some serious roles that, if he himself wasn't nominated, I know that the movies like, Diamond, Rough Diamond, something, whatever. Um, he has done some good works, and the issue is, I'm still gonna say, hey, that's Adam Sandler if he ever shows up in Star Wars, and I'm gonna assume that that's still going to be a silly bit and antic, and I'm not really here for it. Like you had said, I'm okay the first couple of times. I was definitely Jason Sudeikis was a scout trooper, and he was the one taking pot shots at Grogu before IG-11 came in, and Daniel Craig famously is in The Force Awakens as a stormtrooper. I'm totally cool learning about that after the fact that, oh, hey, that nameless soldier that whose face I didn't see and played no prominent role in the scene or really even in the episode at all was actually this famous actor. When you give them the small part, you're displaying the person. You're not displaying Star Wars anymore. And I'm totally with you that it takes me out of the scene, out of the universe, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not here for it, and I hope that they kind of curtail it a little bit. The scene overall didn't make sense to me. The other point I wanted to make on this, unless you had some thoughts on Mr. Meadows,
I
who
do.
okay, well, let me toss it over back to you then.
It's no, I just
No.
jumping.
This deserves like I want you to take the floor and spend as much time on this matter as it warrants, because while you alluded earlier to saying like, oh, we've talked about this before, like in previous episodes, those are still unreleased, folks. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but we've talked about it a lot, but we haven't published recordings that have talked about it. So I want you to go off.
No, I'm not going to go off. It's pertinent to Tim Meadows, and this is just like a parting shot that, again, I think validates our point. I like Tim Meadows a lot. I think he's part of some of the funniest sketches on SNL. I think like the Ladies Man bit was iconic. But Tim Meadows, for perspective, the cameo that Tim Meadows makes in The Office when he's like talking to Michael at a Chili's and they're doing like a conversation about negotiating paper, he's playing a more serious role in The Office than he's playing in a Star Wars sequence where there's a conversation occurring about like pirates slaughtering innocent
Yeah.
people. And
Yeah.
like that to me is like where it's not an indictment of Tim Meadows. Like he got nothing negative to say about the guy. He's amazing. But it's that people have to appreciate the fact that like the viewer comes into these with not baggage but perspective, like, and that's to your point. Like, so you flashed up a cameo of someone famous as an actor who was actually like very iconic in the 90s. Like, how do you expect me to react? Do you want me just to like objectively sit there and like solemnly be like, oh yes, an actor, Tim Meadows, I'm going to sit here and like let him do his bit? Like, nah, man. And that's my point, is like you're turned around in like a dramatic scenario when suddenly a comedic actor is not even being dramatic, like he's being funny. And so that's all I
Right.
had to say about that. But I just, that's what, like, I walked away from that episode thinking, in that scene in particular, I'm like, he was more serious and actually funnier, but more importantly, like he was actually serious and like playing a straight man in The Office than here, where you captured the screen perfectly. It's like this character of like, well, I'm kind of like a middling bureaucrat, and like, let's weigh the positives. He's like, dude, these people are
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
slaughtered by pirates, and he's like, I don't know, like, I don't know.
It doesn't even seem like the right place to go, to be honest. Like I understand that the New Republic is still in transition, but like this does not seem like a military setting. Because if it is, my final point that I'm going to complain on, Elia Kane, what's she doing there? Okay,
I
if you can
know.
make military like you can't make military requests in a non-confidential, secure location like this for any number of reasons. Certainly not in front of someone who defected from the Empire, from a known warlord Moff who did not give up and who is on the loose.
Right, like he's
Like I understand they're trying to put this up, and I think Triple Agent is maybe looking right. Maybe the whole thing is like, oh, everyone's like, oh yeah, she's working for Gideon, and maybe towards the end of the season, she's actually the one that pulls the trigger against Gideon because she's working for Thrawn. I have some speculation. I don't want to get into it in this episode because I want to wait till the season of Mando ends. But I got some long-term Star Wars speculation. But anyways,
no, I agree, and I would say
like it
too,
just, I was just like, how, I understand they wanted her they want her to be informed, and they want her to be able to slightly influence the situation to her liking and all of that. You can't, again, this goes back to my the Mandos and the ships are exactly as powerful or exactly as weak as the story requires. Elia Kane has exactly as much or exactly as little access and freedom as her story requires. And that's lame. Like, I'm sorry. Like, okay,
it's lame
okay.
because
George
she's
R. R. Martin
she's
is not
like
going to finish.
wearing.
Let me just get this point out. This is important. George R. R. Martin's never going to finish his A Song of Ice and Fire. I've already accepted it. But the reason he cannot finish them is because he's got writer's block. And the reason he has writer's block is because he looks at his story and he's like, I can't just magic brush write these critical problems that I've created away. I literally cannot figure out what to do. He's famously said that like he killed off one character and that character was like a linchpin to keeping the story going, and so now he's like really screwed. But like, I respect the hell out of him because he's like, I'm not just gonna give you some crap. Like, I can't myself figure it out. So these Star Wars writers, I know they got churned out. I know they're Disney. I know whatever. It's a product. It's a factory. I get it. But like, come on, make it believable.
Dude,
okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox.
We left Rogue, like in Rogue One, which occurs like less than a decade or about a decade before this, more or less, like given whatever. Like, you have like the rebel high command being like, all right, like we're gonna like snipe this dude, and like it's like hardcore, man. Like, I mean, you have all these sectors, and you and I can go super deep. I mean, you got guys in the rebellion like Ori Marco, and I forget his name, General Dryden. That's not right. The guy who is sort of like the one that Cassian reports to in Rogue One. He's like super hardcore. He kind of looks like Conan O'Brien. But like,
is it Dresden?
Dresden. I was gonna say, I think it's that. But my point in all this is like, you have this incredibly like disciplined and insurgent group, and very well organized and thoughtful, right? Like, go back to even some of the discourse and like dialogue of Mon Mothma in Andor, and then like to your point, suddenly like you have people who were Imperial defectors less than a year before, who are wearing uniforms, by the way, that might as well just say like, I was a traitor, I was evil. And I'm glad that the pilot kind of calls us out. He's like, no, you didn't like surrender, you were captured. And she's like, I was liberated. But like, to your point, like these people are just like walking into like offices and having discussions about, you know, what you've described, especially when in the very plot and fabric, like there's a reason they're called out like that. And I guess my disappointment is like, don't make the rebellion seem so incompetent that like the minute that the New Republic was established, that they're just like, that they're able to maintain control, but simultaneously be like this tolerant is probably a good way to say it. Because, oh my God, like if that's how like these people are behaving, then I really hope, and I'm just going to say it, like, I really hope this isn't an eventual setup to like The Force Awakens where, well, yeah, like, but it's been like, this ineptitude is just compounded over 35 years. Like, of course, this is what happened because they didn't pay attention to anything. And it's like, well, that's like just a really lame way to take the story. That's all there is.
Yeah. I understand the difference, and actually, the X-wing, again rebranded Rogue Squadron books, go into this where part of the strategy of the Empire post Return of the Jedi, post even truly Fall of Coruscant, is a very pivotal moment, because now the Rebel Alliance, which used to use guerrilla tactics, which used to just be a rebel insurgency, et cetera, is now like a legitimate government. And I understand they have transitional problems. They have leaks. It happens. It occurs. But it happens in a way more mature way. And I'm not saying the writing is necessarily better or good, but they definitely aren't like, oh, just let this former Imperial walk around. They capture them. They interrogate them. They keep them in prison. They use them, whatever. They definitely don't. They're not just like letting them run around. And I understand that there's different tones. I get it. It's okay. It's fine. But to your point, I guess, and we can end it on this. I don't make it. Don't simplify it. Don't make this like a dumb, incompetent government that can't handle things, that has already failed before it's even really truly started, because it undercuts a lot in Star Wars for me.
Agreed.
So, all right, man. Well, should we head to the Essential Flight?
I think so. I would be. I'm
Okay.
super down to talk about it. Do you want me to go ahead and just jump in on Ulic?
I sure do.
Okay, interesting art you chose. I feel like I'm just gonna like take a really funny pot shot. It's not even a pot shot, but it's just more of a comment we were talking about last night. I don't know how many images of you have of him, but my favorite thing about characters in the 90s were if you were assembling a protagonist that had somewhat that wasn't like squeaky clean like Captain America. The recipe was like, okay, for my quasi anti-hero, I'm gonna throw in some leather gloves that go to the forearm. I'm going to throw in a super padded series of like leather shoulder puffy armor. Maybe going to have just some like random accessories like pouches adorning them. And if all else fails, I'm going to just coat them in all black. And I feel like Ulic Qel-Droma was the former. And then like
this could be Dash
latter.
Rendar if you put a gun in his hand instead of the pistol.
Or any
not
member
far
of
off.
any member of the X Force. But no. So the reason we chose Ulic Qel-Droma, again, I'll kind of get to why I think it ties nicely to the old canon of Mandalore. So there's a character, he is almost sort of like an analog to Luke Skywalker. But he was a character that lived about 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, or the final sequence of Star Wars: A New Hope, and was a Jedi. The cool thing about this period of time was in the Star Wars lore, they were releasing these comic books that went back way far. So we've talked about this before, but yeah, Tales of the Jedi is one of them. It's really cool that they decided to go back so far that there really wouldn't be a lot of impact, because they really wanted to give themselves a lot of runway to sort of build and expand the universe. The thing that I always thought was really cool is like back then, the Jedi weren't really centralized. So while we saw like a Jedi temple and a Jedi order probably, 500 to 800 years before the Battle of Yavin, they talk about it in like the New Republic and other places, and then you see it in the prequel trilogy. Back in the day, it was kind of like an open frontier, especially as people and species and groups were using hyperspace, and it was kind of the Wild West. And so
important point.
And I love that, because the Jedi were basically kind of like what you see in like old kung fu movies. You had a master who was force attuned. They were setting up their own sort of like training ground slash, I don't even use their word temple, that's too formal, but they had their own like series of like masters and pupils, and they kind of just again made themselves sort of like watchmen of certain systems or certain territories. And in the case of Ulic Qel-Droma, like his story was effectively one that's how he was raised. In the story, and I'm not going to give you like a full character bio, but the way you're introduced to him is like there's a series of like conflicts happening on a particular planet. They go to like save someone from a kidnapping. They call this like the Beast Wars. There's all these different like basically monsters and alien species they have to fight. But the cool thing about this is like
I've got historical facts on that for you guys, but you keep going.
No. So, and again, this is to just be kind of a recap on why we chose him. But the cool thing I thought about him is, so over the series of the comics and the stories, he's an interesting character to me for a few reasons. The first is that he's kind of one of the only ones that he follows a really interesting trajectory from being like a Jedi to a Jedi Master to this sort of like hero. He ultimately goes to the dark side. There's a whole series of stories where he basically becomes one of the Lords of the Sith, along with Exar Kun, who we'll talk about at greater length. He warrants his own episode, but Exar Kun was another like fallen Jedi. So these guys are like your typical like Jedi Knight heroes. They fall to the dark side, by virtue of their travels or what have you. And then ultimately, like there's just a massive battle and series of wars that engage or that ensue. One of the women that Ulic Qel-Droma falls in love with is a character by the name of Nomi Sunrider. Also a really cool character. We could again spend plenty of time on her. But like one of the things that she's able to do is ultimately sever his connection to the Force. So like effectively depowers him, which is kind of an interesting turn back in like Star Wars lore and canonicity. And then ultimately what happens is, he loses powers. He realizes he was on the wrong side of things. And so he ultimately helps them take over and take out Exar Kun, who builds a temple on, drum roll please, Yavin 4, which ends up being part of what tied sort of this to the new movies. So this was like kind of where that arc ultimately ended. The reason that my favorite part about his story, aside from all the cool adventures that he's in, both as a hero and a villain, is I am a huge fan of Westerns. I could do a podcast about Westerns. I mean, I love them so much, and I love the motif. I love everything about it. I love the structure of how those stories are told. And his story is really cool because not only does this sort of occur in a sort of frontier Wild West type setting, but his ultimate demise is like very indicative of what happened to a lot of like really prominent gunfighters back in the day. So at the end, like he finally comes around. They've overthrown Exar Kun. They've taken back Yavin 4. He sort of is reflecting back on like this crazy complicated life. He's done a lot of bad things. Effectively, think about like at the end of the movie, if Anakin had been redeemed by Luke but not died. And so suddenly you have this character who's like standing there kind of walking around, and it's, lo and behold, it's not like a great Sith Lord, and it's not a Jedi Master. It's like some little spacer guy that sees him off on a distance and was like, oh, that guy was like a war criminal. Like I could make a name for myself by like basically shooting him when he's not looking, and that's how he dies.
It's Robert Ford.
Yeah, it's Robert Ford. It's I should know this. The guy who assassinated Wild Bill Hickok, like the most dangerous gunman of all time. Like, and it's that thing of like, it's this little weaselly guy who, when the protagonist isn't looking, like that's like the irony and the tragedy of like the death. Anyways, I wanted to just that's like the 55,000 foot view of him. I think that's a really cool period in Star Wars. That's sort of like Knights of the Old Republic before there was like Knights of the Old Republic as a video game. And to me, that was like a very interesting time in Star Wars lore because it was ancient, but they had so much latitude and runway to create their own universe. And yeah, like the picture you have, like this absolutely reeks of the 90s, but in like the best way possible. I mean, down to the costumes and the hair and everything. And so I look at it with a lot of nostalgia, but Exar Kun like ended up being a pretty big deal, even in the sense of like, it wasn't really until the Disney takeover. His character had always sort of pervaded the fabric of Star Wars. Like he was the other kind of big bad / tragic fallen hero.
He comes back in the Jedi Academy series trilogy written by Kevin J. Anderson.
I think and then in close on this and then I want you to jump in. Because Star Wars wasn't probably as fleshed out back in the day as it is now. Well, not probably, because it wasn't. It was always fun to see sort of like their take on these things, regardless of how locked into a time or a style they are. But it's no different to me than Star Wars. And so again, pure nostalgia taking over, much like when we see sort of the aesthetic of Star Wars in the 70s, because it was made in the 70s, and you get the vibe and the color and the sepia and like all that. The reason I like Tales of the Jedi was those comic books, that story, the characters. It also looks like very of the 90s, right? And that will also help bring Dark Horse to the map as a comic book publisher with, really kind of making Star Wars something that was outside of just the core characters. Like this is like a cool story to go follow. Gosh, this also looks like this image you put up could be like have ripped from like the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and then just they gave them like
they literally just, Photoshop wasn't around, so they had to do whatever editing they could back in the day. They took out guns and whips and they added just like the lightsabers and the loose flowing thing on you. Like otherwise they're like in a temple. Otherwise they're in a temple.
It's the little like loincloth basically.
The loincloth, that was the word I was looking for. Yeah, thank you.
They just like put it on like the characters in Mortal Kombat. They're like, everybody gets one of these. This is like what we do in the 90s. Or, somebody's gonna randomly get a gauntlet on one arm, and that's just gonna be like what makes you know this takes place in the future or something. So
uneven shoulder armor.
Yeah.
I love it so much. Oh, let's do it. Let's do a little bit of a deep dive here on some of this stuff. You told me, I think this morning or last night that you told me last night, like right before I fell asleep, that you wanted to do Ulic Qel-Droma. So I took the day off, not because of that, but I took the day off. And so I did a little bit of research. To your first point, I'm not going to go crazy deep. We might eventually do one-off like short videos or short recordings that go into like hyper detail. But I wrote a lot of notes, and I'll go through some of them. A lot of them you hit. His story occurs 4,000 years before original trilogy, everything we know about Star Wars, and it really actually occurs about 4,400 years before, because there's a Sith Lord. His name's Freedom Nad. We don't have to go into too much detail, but just understand that he was buried. His sarcophagus exists on the planet that Ulic Qel-Droma had to go to, and it was still sustaining power, and it was still powering things there. And so, to your point, there was like the Beast Wars, which occurred. There was a kidnapping that was actually very reminiscent of Game of Thrones, very reminiscent of A Song of Ice and Fire, where it was a perceived kidnapping of the royal princess by the rebellious Beast Warrior, Beast Riding group faction that led to a war, when in reality the princess was eloping with the leader and wanted to bring peace to the planet, but it was the royal faction that didn't, want the peace. Classic trope. Love it. And so through a series of like defending and attacking, Ulic eventually becomes seduced or confronts Freedom Nad in the spirit. They try to get rid of it. Some stuff goes down. They fight. They win. There's some other people that are looking for some Sith artifacts that come along, and they play a later role. Like, I'm already looking at my notes. I'm like, oh my God, this is not right for a podcast. But there's just which speaks to how deep the EU and these legends, and especially in this age of Star Wars, goes. But basically, Ulic Qel-Droma, all the Jedi have a big meeting to figure out what they're going to do about Freedom Nad's return and him overtaking some other replacement people once the first enemy is defeated. And so they're talking, and then they get attacked, and Ulic Qel-Droma's master dies, and he's like, oh no, how are we going to defeat this new villainous group called the Krath? And so Ulic Qel-Droma's plan, not dissimilar to Luke Skywalker, to your earlier point, is that he can pretend to go to the dark side, and he can join this group undercover and then kind of defeat it from within. In reality, he's not really trusted, and he actually gets Sith poison that when he gets angry, he goes to the dark side. It's a little bit cheesy. It sounds cool in like historical context, but when you look at the comics, it's a little cheesy. But it works well. So ends up, he doesn't want to kill Nomi Sunrider, the who tries to rescue him, and then she gets captured, because he doesn't want to give up the fact that he's undercover. And so he's like, yeah, we'll kill her. And then he plots her to get free. Some of the leaders of that group figure it out. They confront him. Ulic Qel-Droma kills them. He falls to the dark side in reality. And then he's eventually going to confront Exar Kun, right? This guy who has discovered and stumbled upon the dark side through his own story that we don't need to get into here, although that is very much intertwined. And through that, they actually end up joining forces while they're fighting, as you can see in the picture for our YouTube listeners or watchers. While they're fighting, an ancient Sith spirit is like, guys, don't fight, team up. You guys will be way more powerful. And so then that's actually what happens. They combine forces, they wreak havoc. There's a lot more that goes into it. So basically, the arc of this character is there's three acts. There is the rise of his prominence from going from student to powerful Jedi Knight to event, and then his downfall of succumbing to the dark side after the loss of his master and another series of events that just systematically broke him. And then there's the loss of his power. To your point, Nomi Sunrider comes in later and removes his power. And then his redemption arc, where when he becomes powerless, he actually kind of, very reminiscent of Last of Us, HBO style, video game style, whichever, takes on Nomi Sunrider's daughter to kind of train her in the Force, even though he himself has no power, no connection to the Force anymore. So she kind of seeks him out, and then them trying to figure out, like a group of people trying to figure out where they went. They think that she ran away or that she's in trouble. Is what leads to his ultimate demise. But he was very much like Logan, taking the small, like Lone Wolf and Cub. Any number of, maybe that's not the best example, but any number of themes where like the grizzled veteran who's done bad things in their life takes on new meaning by taking on the younger child. And that story is sadly cut off early because, like you said, Mr. Robert Ford, his name is actually like Agadogan, something weird like that. I'm not going to look it up. It's ridiculous. Comes in and shoots him during the reconciliation. Last thing I'll say, and I'll throw it out to you. They got figs. They got figs. So you can see on for our YouTube viewers, on your left with the double blue lightsabers, you can see Exar Kun, and on the right is Ulic Qel-Droma. And these are actually pretty cool looking. They came in a 2-pack, comic 2-pack that it came with. Maybe not Tales of the Jedi comic itself, but it definitely came with a comic. And those are actually awesome packs. I think they're, by and large, not every single one of them, but most of them that are in that series are quite expensive and valuable. Yeah. So that's the deep dive. We can go deeper if you got questions. I know that Ulic Qel-Droma came from Alderaan. I know his master was Arca-Jeth. His brother confronted him, and one of the tipping points for Ulic Qel-Droma was facing and killing his brother in single combat. So that's no good.
He appears in the
we can deep dive.
He appears in the Clone Wars video game as a holo to Anakin as well. Which
is prominently featured. So you had mentioned Kotar, and I'm sorry, I really will get back to you. You had mentioned Kotar. The history of these people you'll like encounter in whatever recordings or the RPG's version of giving you a backstory without having to do cutscenes where you just like read the books and stuff. Some people do it, some people don't. But like within the contextual history of Kotar, they allude to Freedon Nad a lot, and they talk about Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma a little bit. Freedon Nad is another pivotal major character, but for another day maybe.
Go back to the image of from the original Essential Guide, the black and white. That was the other thing. Everybody in the 90s had that haircut. It's like he looks like the Rocketeer. Yeah. No, there isn't much to say. I mean, I think we've covered it pretty well on him. I would encourage our listeners, or if you're watching on YouTube, go check out the Tales of the Jedi stuff. It's worth the dive, and it's certainly worth the minimal time investment to go read up on some of this. If for no other reason, then it gives you a good flavor of like what Star Wars used to be in my mind. And again, just like everything is sort of rooted in a particular period of time, I think this is a very good encapsulation of like Star Wars as it was kind of emerging in the 90s to become a property again. So shortly after the comic book, or shortly after the Thrawn trilogy, Heir to the Empire and all that goodness had kind of emerged. This was the first series of books. This was also kind of like the first jump from Dark Horse into like comic books, telling a new story. And again, it's very nostalgic for a lot of this, but I would still say at the end of the day, the entire fabric of it all was still well executed. So
yeah. And what I can say is I definitely concur. Check out the comics. They are vibrant in color in only the way that 90s can. They have designs in the way that only 90s can. But if you are really looking for, and I promise, I mean, we have to pump this and promo this because it's kind of the unofficial sponsor of this session of this segment. The Essential Chronology, the old Essential Chronology, the original one from Volume 1, has Luke and Yoda, Darth Maul, Mon Mothma, Emperor Palpatine on the front. It has like 3 to 4 very densely written pages on this time frame. I pulled a lot of the nerdy stuff from that. When you read the comics and you read the execution of something, you can be like, maybe that one's not the best drawn, or maybe the dialogue in this comic is cheesy because the writing wasn't the focal point in the 90s. It was more of the arc itself. But when you read a summary of all of that as kind of a notation of history, it all reads very interestingly. One of the things I didn't get into is Friedrich Nad had long after his death, 400 years after his death, he had a cult group following because, again, his power was still emanating from his tomb. And when they were trying to get rid of his sarcophagus, like the cult had an uprising and tried to steal and did steal the sarcophagus and take it to their own place, which was the same place that they were trying to exile it to. So kind of worthless. But at any rate, like in practice and in the comics, that probably wasn't executed the best. The storyboarding might not have been incredible for it, whatever. But when you read it as a couple of paragraphs as a note in history, and you're like, oh yeah, there was like a cult uprising and they took this and they did that because of their religious sect and blah, blah, blah. It reads actually very interestingly. So that's my pump. This is the Essential Flight segment. So had to get out the Essential Chronology as an excellent reference in addition to all of the other books and volumes and part of that series.
Love it. Well, you want to take us out with some information about the giveaway?
Yeah. Thank you so much. So again, I have way too many sandcrawlers, so we're still doing it. The giveaway code for our listeners is Sunrider. Remember, this is a very easy giveaway. Guys, this is so easy. It's so easy that there's not an additional step besides just giving me your information to where I ship it to. I'll do it anyways. You don't even have to give me the code word. You don't have to give me the code word. You send a DM to the Sandcrawler Podcast, all one word, on Instagram at the Sandcrawler Podcast. You send me your address. Just say, give it to me. I will absolutely send you a Sandcrawler Micro Machine. I'm happy to do it. If you want to give me the code word, all the better. Unnecessary at this point. I'm feeling very generous. We will do more episodes. This is not going to be, I think that this is going to be a weekly show. I want you guys to stick with us. Here's my promise to you. You will get no less than 6 to 8 months out of this. I promise you will get, that's a very guaranteed minimum. Jeff and I have recorded so many podcasts before we started publishing this that we have a backlog of awesome episodes where we dive deep, maybe into the New Republic or the Old Republic, or we dive deep into different characters we haven't discussed so far in our published episodes. I consider that to be volume 1. We will release them if for whatever reason we don't have time to record. So rest assured, even if Jeff and I are like, we're not feeling it this week, even if life gets in the way, we have a backlog of episodes to publish. So my promise to you is that in addition to being able to send you a Sandcrawler, I will make sure that we publish weekly for the next 6 months. And with that, Jeff.
Stand by it.
Yeah, it's going to happen. We literally have 22 episodes. That's the 6 months. We don't have to record another episode. We could stop recording with this episode and still release for 6 months.
What if I just EM you Sunrider like 25 times? Do you have to give me all 25 of the Sandcrawlers?
So if you've already won a Sandcrawler, I don't want to give you another one. But I feel so bad because I sent you that care package and I can't believe that I did not put a Sandcrawler in. I was like, oh my God, like, how did I not send co-host Jeff a Sandcrawler?
Let me do you one better. I'm gonna. This is official but unofficial. But we are on all we're trying to get on all the rest of the platforms, but we check our YouTube. If you leave a nice comment on the YouTube, I'll sweeten the pot. I'll throw something else pretty cool in there. Daniel and I will talk. It'll be worth it. You get a Sandcrawler and you'll get something else. And that's how we're buying your love and affection and your viewership.
Yeah. Listen. We understand what this is. This is like a very, like, we don't even have to like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We'll buy your listenership. Don't care. We'll buy it. We love Star Wars. We're not in this to, especially after I saw how little YouTube videos actually make on a per viewer basis. It's astronomically low. Like, you have to have millions and millions of viewers to even sustain like an income. So we're not doing it for notoriety. We might eventually want to become extras in Star Wars in some capacity, which would be the most sinister ulterior motive we have here. But we just really want to talk about Star Wars. We want to share that love with all of you. And if we have to convince you how much we love it by sending you stuff for free, we'll do it. A YouTube comment. That is easy. YouTube comment.
Da, 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 da.
Hey. We'll get it figured out. I promise. So on that note, again, the Sandcrawler podcast on Instagram. We will get on Apple Music. The only thing in our way is a low resolution logo at this point. I got everything else figured out, but it was like, your image is so bad, we've rejected it as Apple. Thank you very much. So we're going to have to do another one. And then we'll be on Spotify, and then we'll be on Apple Music. We'll be on Spotify shortly thereafter. And I will eventually figure out YouTube. I want to get this episode published quickly. I learned GarageBand it just enough to be able to put like intro and outro music, which is maybe even playing right now. But I don't know enough about iMovie to make it fancy yet, and I'd rather just get the content out there. I'll eventually learn it. I'll learn it. But I got 2 kids. Got a job. I got Star Wars to watch. So it'll be slow goings on that. Anyways, that was a long outro. Jeff, my man, good episode. And let me say this. May the Force be with you.
And may the Force be with you.